it's a pleasure on behalf of Pauline and myself. I like to share that we are happy to share this piece of work, as this is really making sure that we are not just making one ethnographic documentary, but really thinking how can we use ethnographic documentary as a tool in intangible cultural heritage. Today we will walk you through this production and all activities we did, both from a film perspective as from a more academic research perspective. But we will definitely share with you that if you really work on ethnographic documentary, that you talk about filmmaking. And you see it's also terminology, because there is, from the very start, we can say there is a clash of discourses. We will have a first part on opening. The tool review will follow. Then we focus on the making of, and we go to the screening and backstage affairs. And of course, we don't know exactly what are your expectations, but it's our expectation that we can share with you in an open and collegial way how we work, so that we don't only have to share success stories. Now, if we go to the opening shots, so what you do with the opening shots, or you can also call it establishing shots in a film, you arrive somewhere. With the ethnographic documentary, you are arriving at Texel, and you immediately meet the main characters, who are Ineke and Annetje. Today, you are arriving in Wageningen. You see a beautiful landscape, Wageningen, small town with our university, which originally was a University of Agriculture, and it's still a tiny town with beautiful landscapes around us. We are from Wageningen University, and the second picture you see, that is a research day. We recently had the one and only general meeting we had in Corona times, and I think that's also the reason why we are doing webinars, but even without Corona times, it's nice to have online webinars. Main characters of today, you see Pauline working hard on the beach in Texel, and I'll tell you, it was very cold while we were on the beach in Texel. And in the other picture, I'm the one with the blue coat, trying to explain to Ineke what we are doing, why we should make this walking shot, why we would like to see her entering the house. Now, of course, if you start bringing your audience somewhere and explaining who are the main characters, in this case, we are in this webinar, but we also like to know, who are you? So please take a minute to share who you are, what is your name or your expectation, anything else you'd like to share with us. Mention this in the chat box so that we can fairly try to adapt maybe to your expectations. Please go for it. Use the chat box and tell us who you are and what you would like to know. I don't know who's doing the countdown. Actually, I'm wondering if we have a countdown. Maybe I could make a countdown on my phone to check on the time. Oh, now I don't know how many seconds already we are away from. No, I think 35 seconds will do for you to mention something in the chat box. And if not, of course, you can continue while we are continuing with our presentation. Yeah. Hello, we continue. We hope you have something indicated in the chat box, and we move now to the second scene, which is about tool review. Tool review refers to our thinking, how are we going to use ethnographic documentary? We are going to position it in the Pericles project. And in the Pericles project, of course, we talked a lot about spaces and places. We're talking about coastal areas. We're talking about maritime culture, etc., etc. But we are referring to intangible heritage. We're talking about stories. We are talking about identities people have built up, you know, being or being from, how do you say that? I don't know. Sorry, for everybody who speaks fluent English, more or less, más o menos, I would say. It's about how we connect to the past and how the past and our current contemporary identities brings us to the very much wanted sustainable futures, of course. In Pericles, we have a visual theory, as we call it, as here in Wageningen, we are working on visual research methods, and we try to figure out, to come to grips with how can we design and develop. So it's not only design, but also put it in practice, tools for participatory and deliberative governance. That relates immediately to a concern for the inclusion of stakeholder voices and stakeholder stories or stakeholder narratives, or even their discourses, which are very often not included in such situations, but also the visualization of their context. So if we talk about the coast, let's show the coast, what is happening over there. And don't worry, we're not moving really today to the Arctic. We stay nicely in our webinar space. We are talking, as I said before, so we are really talking about a search for sustainable futures and social change. And on top of all this comes, of course, the issue of art-science interfaces. It's different being a filmmaker as being a researcher. And sometimes people question Pauline and myself, are you a filmmaker or are you a researcher? I think in the end, because it has always been intertwined, you can't be one of them. It's both. They are together. But in research, in this case, we focus also on the specific of ethnography, which is more or less in the anthropological domain. And what's interesting in ethnography is we're talking about methods which are focusing on daily activities, on daily experience. So as an ethnographer, so as a researcher using ethnographic methods, you go out. You don't stay in your office, you don't stay at your desk, you go out and you observe what people are doing in their normal or routine activities. Another way why we use ethnographies is, if you look at here, you see below we have a reference, the very book, I like it, about writing field notes. So you are immediately at work, and they refer that to sketches. And then a sketch is what they call a scene primarily through detailed imagery. So let's say it's a photograph or a still image, as we would say in film. And episodes, recount action and moves in time. So there we have the motion, and there is where from a film perspective, we can talk about scenes. So if you are doing ethnography with film, you should be able to recognize stills and you should be able to recognize scenes. From a perspective of documentary theory, you look at typologies. How can we explain what we are doing? And one of the famous typologies is, of course, the typology of Bill Nichols with his poetic, expository, participatory, reflexive, performative, and observational documentary. All this builds, of course, in a very dichotom basic description of documentary, saying, well, you have either fiction, film, or non-fiction, and that is documentary. But that's, that doesn't give us much information, as whereas the typologies of documentary do give us an element of understanding of what we are seeing. And that brings us to a working definition we developed for this ethnographic documentary, defining it as stories linked to observational documentary based on reality and filmed by a crew, which includes ethnographic and filmmaking professionalism with an articulated methodology of the production, including the visual ethics applied. Lots of words, as definitions tend to do, but what you see here in our case, this issue of filmmaking professionalism, it's an issue. Too often we see that we have to train our students on statistics, eventually a bit on interviewing, but we hardly have an opportunity to train our students on filmmaking. Yeah, and eventually you wish they master all these methods similarly. Yeah. We also refer to visual ethics, and here comes an aspect in that in the typology of Bill Nichols links a little bit to the poetic method, because in the poetic typology or the poetic documentary, it's also about how do you show, how do you bring things on stage, and that is something we are very much aware of, and we talk a lot about portrayal, but it also links to visual ethics. Yeah, we find the way you portray the people you are working in, or in bold terms, your research subjects, you have to treat them ethically as well. Now we go back to Pauline. She has looked at your contributions in the chat box to give us an idea who you are and what are your expectations. Pauline.
Okay, hi, welcome everyone, and thank you very much already for your contribution. It's very interesting to see who's joined us. As far as I can see, also from different countries, especially Portugal, there are a lot of people present. And what people are expecting is really a combination, which I think also you will be hearing, what we are planning to talk about. It's the combination of heritage and ethnographic filmmaking. So there is, for example, somebody asking I'm curious about what goes into making an ethnographic documentary and how to tell stories of culture and heritage digitally, or how to communicate intangible aspects of cultural heritage. There's people from someone from a maritime museum, as well as people from science communication and history. Yeah, that's about it.
Okay, thank you. Now, so it's good. We immediately answer some of your questions with scene 3, the making of. And in this scene, we will try to share with you how we made this documentary. We followed a film production cycle. Yeah, so as any other media production, you follow certain steps, which in a model like the one we are showing here looks very straightforward, but of course in reality it's more an iterative process. Yeah, if you define a certain definition, you start working, you adapt, etc. And that brings us from the start of this project, which started at the annual meeting of Pericles in Texel, where we met with the main character Ineke. And of course it started somehow before, but the real production started there till the live premiere on May 18. The production of ethnographic documentary, of course, you need to know a theme and you need to know your characters. As we were at the annual meeting in Texel, we heard the stories of different stakeholders who are participating in the Pericles project, which is indeed people from community-based initiatives, people from musea, people from the academia, quite a variety of groups. And all the time we hear it is about the fisheries sector. Yeah, it's about the sea. It's very different if you are working on the land, but being at the coast, you have to relate to the sea. And so we felt it was about fisheries, as it was already planned to make this production in the Netherlands. So it was about the history of Dutch fisheries sector. We met with Ineke, and Ineke, she is the wife of a fisher, mother of fisher, and she is a historian herself. She started talking about the Dutch whaling history and also announcing that later in the day we would have an excursion to the Dutch whalers' house on Texel. So what happens then, it was very accidentally somehow that we met with Ineke, yeah? And let's say as a researcher, you would think it over and write down the name and think it could be something. But as a filmmaker, you have to recognize your opportunities. Or sometimes we say, you have to make sure that you find your own lucky moment. So actually what we did after this presentation, we immediately requested to Ineke if we could drive with her to the site of the excursion. And in the end, that's also the first takes you see in the documentary are made from the back seat. Yeah, so we hardly were seated, and I said, Pauline, let's film this and try to get the sound straight. And so we managed to make something out. So that's really filmmaking, starting to organize your own lucky moments. Later, we went back, let's say, to a more academic development part. So we did research, we read literature, we visited the Dutch Royal Museum in Amsterdam to see how is the Dutch whaling history represented in objects of art, which basically paintings. We had a conversation with a Norwegian scientist who interestingly shares a different story on whaling history, and was able almost to share recipes on whale meat, etc., and sausages, and bringing in the idea also that even histories after hundreds of years are maybe bound to specific national boundaries. We also had the opportunity to work with a group of students as we were teaching visual research methods. And we asked those students to come up to do a search for the representation of Dutch whaling history over time. So they were somehow our student assistants at the start of the film production. And we also bothered about data management. How are we going to show things? What aspects of portrayal are we going to consider? And we bothered about informed consent. And we often work in our academic productions with visual informed consent. So not only, let's say, a paper signature, but really maybe negotiating the entire activity with the people we are going to film. And going back quickly to the typology of Nichols, there are, if you think now, so there are elements of what is sometimes characterized as participatory video. Yes, might well be, yeah, because we are not, we are no journalists, we are no paparazzis. We consider the people we are working with due respect and inform them what we are doing, why we are doing so, and what will happen with the final result. The exercise of visiting the Rijksmuseum and to look at paintings representing Dutch fisheries and whaling history, well, that was very clear that it was about ice, that whales are very big, and that you have a lot of heroes. Young man, strong man, beating wintertime. So, you know, that's what I thought, okay, we have to do something with winter, yeah? And then if you go to developing a creative concept, we thought, okay, we have to film in wintertime, yeah? Because if we would do the filming, you know, the Dutch Waddenzee Islands are beautiful. If Matt allows me a tourist recommendation, you're all welcome to visit our islands. They are very beautiful. They throughout the year beautiful, but of course, especially in the more warmer periods. So we decided, no, we shouldn't go in summertime because then everybody thinks that we're just tourists doing some filming. Yeah. It became very clear that we had to use the harbor as a liminal space. The harbor is, when you talk about fisheries, that you don't talk about the coastline, it's the harbor. That's the liminal space in between the sea and the mainland, or the place where people live. Of course, it became clear that we had to find a way to bring women on stage. And not only, as you see in this painting, initially we had only seen women in a kind of desperate attitude, saying goodbye to their beloved ones or waiting for their beloved ones coming back, or the most tragic story, of course, waiting for those men who never came back. So we had clear that in the creative concept as starting of scripting, we had to really think about the position, the visibility of women. Another aspect was to use the blue and the tile work. That was another aspect that we saw. There was a lot of tile work, and there was a lot of blue. And of course, this resonates with water, with the sea and everything. Although the Dutch sea isn't always that blue, but water and sea is blue in a kind of worldwide idea on seas. And we had to deal with dissonant heritage issues. The Dutch, by being engaged in whaling, we also contributed to a large extent to biodiversity issues of extinction, etc., etc. To make things even more complicated, of course, the whaling as an industrial sector some ages ago links also to other colonial activities of the Dutch and the Portuguese and several Western Europe countries who traveled across the world to discover places and do their very impressive activities, which till nowadays have an influence on world issues. Going to the scripting, it became very clear that we had to deal with, we were working with Annetje. She inherited a house. Yeah, she lives in Blaricum. That's let's say in between Amsterdam and Utrecht in the Netherlands, in the continent. And her parents owned the house as a holiday house, and it was commonly thought to be a pilot house. The second storyline is with Ineke Vonk, wife of a fisher who became an historian with expertise in maritime and whaling history. So the script, which wasn't a script, here it becomes complicated because in documentary, you can't write a script. You can develop ideas, you can guide things, but it's not really a script. On the other hand, Pauline and I, we don't like the statement that documentary filming is without scripting. That's either not true. It's a kind of non-scripted script. Yeah, because you make a plan. We decided, to reconstruct how these two stories of these women, and we had already decided we wanted to focus on women, to give them a place in history. So that was our decision. And then we wanted to bring them together to show the story of this house, because the house has always been there, but for many ages almost, it wasn't recognized to be part of heritage in Texel. And the entire story, how this develops, that's also about intangible heritage. Yeah, why is it important? How do these stories develop? So more or less a year ago, we started to organize the production, and that is, of course, it's about the budget. It's about planning a day to visit Annetje in her house in Blaricum, and that was also defined. That's the first thing we do. We wanted to follow more or less a linear order in time, and we said, okay, let's go for this, because the house was also owned by Annetje's family before Ineke came on stage in this story. After the recording in Blaricum, we analyzed the footage, and then we went to Texel for several days. After the recording on Texel, you have to transcribe all your material. I mean, you have to know exactly what everybody talked about. You have to make take lists of everything that has been filmed. And then you go to a paper edit. So you make a first plan, and then all other things of the edit, the credits, the subtitling, etc. We come back to that later as well. This is a general overview. Now, if you look at photography, as we mentioned before, it's not, you don't just take the boat to Texel and say, hey, Pauline, let's have a coffee and then we switch on the camera. What do you think? No, you have a plan. You can't film without a plan. Yeah. So even if you like to call it participatory, or you like to call it, no, but it's the reality, the real world. We just observe reality as it unfolds. No, if you start filming, you make choices. And as a researcher, in the academia, you have to be very explicit about your choices. So it's non-scripted and at the same time somehow scripted. Yeah. So here you see we decided for the harbor as a liminal space. Yeah. And we decided to work in wintertime. And here we have a short film of wintertime, because we felt we had to show the place. And here you see I'm trying to clean the lens as Pauline is doing the camera work. We wanted to show contemporary times of fisheries. And here we wanted to film the roads of Texel, because upon arrival, talking about reality, everybody says, no, but the whalers, they waited, the commanders, they waited in the roads of Texel. And the roads of Texel was a specific place on the sea. It wasn't a harbor in that time. And here we almost froze to death an entire morning before we had the right ship, etc., a clean lens. And then it turned out we were in the wrong place. So then it becomes non-scripted, because if you are in the wrong place, you're in the wrong place. Yeah, as an ethnographic, academic filmmaker, yeah, it may look like a sea, but no, it's a specific place. It has coordinates. If it's the wrong place, it's the wrong place. So here you see more of the roads of Texel. And there we also, for us, it was somehow new, the stories on the roads of Texel, because we realized the ships, we thought it was as somehow easy. We had to maybe do something with the whaling history, and that the Dutch had a great contribution in killing larger groups of whales. But then when we found out that the commanders were waiting on the roads of Texel, they were waiting there also with all the ships going to Indonesia, going to Africa, etc. The good thing, though, this brought us into a closer contact with the museum on Texel, and we somehow figured out how things would work and what we would manage to include in the script and what would we exclude. And actually we couldn't script, we could only find a way, think about a way how to ask, especially Ineke, if she would address this issue. And here we have Ineke, and for those of you who have watched the film, if not, I would recommend you look again, because we think it's a beautiful fragment in the last scenes of the film, where you see how Ineke talks about these dissonant approach to Dutch whaling history, but it's a fragment with very beautiful pauses. It's nice to see her think. And,
ik zie te veel met geschiedenis nu dat ze het met de ogen van nu bekijken. En dat wil ik eigenlijk een beetje, dat hoop ik dat mensen dat kunnen relativeren van nee, het is niet nu, het is toen gebeurd en wij vinden het nu niet goed.
Yeah, so with this fragment of Ineke, we also like to show that it's not us. If we talk about ethnographic documentary, we think ethnography and documentary somehow don't connect. Yeah, ethnography is you are an outsider. You observe reality, you document reality in a certain methodology, and you share it with the world. But often in documentary, you build up an argument. You say, as a filmmaker, yeah, we think this is the truth, or this is the way you should look at issues. We felt in an ethnographic documentary, yeah, it's not up to us to define the final argument, and we managed to get this fragment with Ineke. And that also shows that somehow you just share this interpretation, this fragment, this window on reality with the world, and then more conversations can follow. after all these elements of photography, you have to edit all the work. And here we like to share with you this idea we had initially on the color blue and on tile work. You see in the film, we show the tile work, which is in the house. And we also found this larger tile work in the archive of a tile factory. And we contacted the tile factory and they gave us permission. They did send us a TIFF file, so a high quality file, so we could insert this in the film, and we used it for the title. In the editing, we were still very concerned about how to bring women into the film, because we couldn't deny that this issue of paintings as a most common representation in the 18th century on whaling, we couldn't take out all these heroes, all these men fighting the Arctic conditions. So we had to balance this with women. Fortunately, we figured out that in the Netherlands, but it's available actually to everybody in the world, you can build up a collection in the Dutch Royal Museum. So you can browse through the archive and find, so you use the search terms. Here you see we used search terms such as women in the 18th century, women artists, daily life, women working, interiors. It's interesting, huh? But for another documentary, women weren't depicted that much in the paintings. And if they were depicted, they were, for example, depicting, like you see in the vegetable market, but there are also several paintings. You see women in the market, as they are bowing down so that you can see inside and see their breasts. Or they are doing nothing or carrying a child. It was very hard to find women doing something. We found a few of them. Here we see a lady painting and we see ladies reading. That's what ladies did, at least in the 18th century. The issue of translation and subtitling, you notice we made the film in Dutch because Dutch is the language of our main characters. Also for Pauline and myself, we talk Dutch. And then we initially found place on the budget for an English translation. Then we managed to find additional budget for a translation to French and German. The translations, we didn't make it ourselves, goes to a translation bureau. But even then, if they return the translation in subtitling format, there's still a lot of correction to do. And here we gave you some fragments to show it's very much work in progress. It's something, everything has to be checked and checked again. Then on March 4, we had a review with Anneke and Ineke. We gave them a description of the editing process and we told them what decisions were being made. So the same as we share with you, that we took out another tea making element. We introduced how we focused on the roads of Texel. We introduced that we wanted to pay attention also to dissonant heritage, etc. Before the viewing, both of them indicated they were really excited, which is called spannend. Het is spannend in Dutch, yeah. And they questioned whether they could retrieve their permission. A horrible moment, yeah, because imagine they would say at that moment in time, no, we don't want you to publish the film. But both were happy to feel the film. They were proud of the film. And they said what they liked, that the rhythm was calm, that it wasn't too hasty, which for us has been quite some work because, we had worked for a way longer film. So you have to balance in between the full story on the one hand, and on the other hand, they think, well, but we want to have an audience that watches the film from the beginning to the end. And that is complicated because, in your head, you have to switch from filmmaker perspective to researcher perspective So, but in the end, it became 23 minutes, I think. Yeah. What was interesting, their own role as an audience. They were surprised that they watched the film, and you know, on forehand they thought we are going to watch the film in which we are, and they knew, of course, they were there during photography. But later they said, but we also watch the film as just an audience. Yeah. So this brings us again back to audiences. What do audiences see? What do audiences perceive, etc. And they gave some minor corrections. What was also interesting, that they were somehow surprised. We did a review with them, and they said, well, actually, we feel we are part of the filmmaking team. So then you see us here in the last picture as a filmmaking team. And don't worry, it's the non-alcoholic bubble we called champagne. Yeah, to celebrate, we had brought it to this far. We still weren't finished because, you know, you have to finish the film to show it for the review, but after the review, there were some names to add, and we had to make sure to acknowledge everybody. Yeah, and the upper fragment, what you see is that we included this statement that we made every effort to trace copyright holders, and I think it's important. Because this also shows it's not just any film, but this is part of a referencing system you are very much used to in the university as well. Then regarding the license, the Creative Commons license, that parallels the issue of open access in the academia, meaning that if you have something, you try to share it as open as possible. And in this case, the finances from the European Union allows us, you know, to make this work and to give it open, but somehow restrictive. And we use the most restrictive license, which means everybody can download the work and share it as long as they credit you and don't alter. So it's not allowed for people to download the film and make it a 3-minute version, or even worse, to you know, these software you have nowadays to take fragments and make people say something else. It's not a full guarantee, but if not, you can't do anything anymore. Pauline, I'm at the end of this scene, going back to you.
Yes. So now we have some time for questions and answers, and we have some questions, not that many yet. So if you have any more questions, please ask them in the question and answer box. It's at the bottom of your screen. But the first question, it is, the subjects in the documentary seem very interesting and engaged subjects for the video. Is this the case? And are subjects always willing to talk and open up like they are?
Yeah.
Shall I start with an answer and you add on? Yes, I think indeed, as you said, they are two very interesting women. I find as a filmmaker that actually there are many subjects, or many people are interested in telling their story, but to actually get them to tell the story, what's an important part is that people know why they are telling the story, how a film will be used, so people are motivated to tell the story as well. And one thing which is, I think, a big task of us as filmmakers is to make people feel comfortable to tell their story and to give them the room to tell their story. That will be my answer. I don't know, Lucy.
Yeah, I think it's a very relevant question. It's also a basic question people often ask us. I mean, in this film and in other work we do, how do you manage that people feel confident to share their story? And a very practical answer, I think what Pauline has said, is about building rapport. Huh? But in the practical setting of doing such type of film work or research in a combined manner, it's about making time. Yeah, especially with with students, don't think you can do 4 interviews in a day. Yeah. And even though we took out some tea drinking, if you are not willing to have a tea and to familiarize with people and to also listen to the other stories they want to tell you, until you say, okay, now we are going to document this story, you know, then there it will stop. Then you will hear them starting to hesitate, looking around, you know. So the first answer is taking time, yeah, building the rapport, but also that you are clear, that you are able to explain what you're doing. As Pauline said, people want to know more. They want to know what you are doing, how you are going to do so, how the full procedure is going to work out. And never underestimate your subjects. Yeah. So the people you are working with, they do check on you. Well, Pauline and I are not the most active on social media. We have a LinkedIn page or something. You know, we are there. If you Google us, you find us. And what people find about you should be more or less reliable, and finding that you are continuously more or less working in similar manners. So if we would make tomorrow a Hollywood film with motor racing and traveling to the moon and I don't know what. Oh, fantastic. We are about to win an Oscar now, Pauline. Stop me, tell me I should stop this. Yeah. But then we are doing something very different. Yeah. But if people check on us to find what are you doing, they find, well, we are always more or less in the same field. But the same, if you talk about fisheries, that's also another way. People check on you also during the conversation. And if you come up with, you know, with false engagement, you know, fisheries, not so much, but especially whaling was for both of us very new. Yeah. So if you pretend to know something you don't know, people also, they you know, they don't know where they're talking about. Is this part to the question?
Yeah, and I even think to add on to that, it's when people feel you don't know, they're interested in telling you about their subject. Yeah. Shall I go on to the next question? So the next one is, it's about the subjects as well. It was fun that you met the women in the film by accident. How much time was used in doing research afterwards and for the project in general? Yeah, so I can answer that. It was, we met them by accident, but as Luz explained before, we were open and searching for subjects, and we saw the opportunity when we met these 2 women and saw a story in them. And then how much time we took, we met them in May 2019 during an annual meeting, and the film was finished about a year later, so the whole process took 1 year. And I would say about half a year went into the research and about half a year into the production. Yeah, is that?
Yeah, but not half a year in either case full time. It's only a part-time. It's a part-time activity of our work, and I think we would have liked to do more research. But I mean, you also have to consider your budget. And I think what has taken us way more time than expected. So I would say if you go for this, you go through this production cycle, as we say, you go to a research cycle and you make a plan. I think what was unexpected for us, we have used, I think it's about 70 to 20 hours in the archive of the museum to find paintings of women. Something we never expected. And it's funny because we documented our app history. It was something, you know, we couldn't let it go. You know, at the moment that we decided we want to have women on all paintings, it was clear that we wouldn't stop working before finding them. And another aspect, we had our time management wasn't correct at all, was this issue of checking the subtitles. which was interesting, of course, because there you realize that many of the statements they make, moving it from one language to the other, that the language is so much culturally bound. I mean, you can't just say a boat is a boat. It's now that we have the Portuguese students with us, for example, in Spanish you have pescado and pez. In Dutch we have one word for both pescado and pez. Yeah, so it's you have language problems to make it fit, and there you know, as you go through the production, you become kind also of emotionally engaged, and we really felt it was important that the subtitles did justice to what Annetje and Ineke had been telling us. So that is, I think that were two elements that took way more time as we had planned on forehand.
And I think always when you make a film, what you're doing seems as if we said before, as if you're making a whole series of films, but in the end you do one. So also all the research we did, reading books about the Dutch whaling history, and students searching for pictures. Not everything you will find back in the documentary, but we did research very broadly on it. Yeah. The next question is actually about the budget. Just a little curiosity, and to make comparison, what was the budget of the film? I think, I don't know if I can exactly say an answer to this, because Loes and I both work at the Wageningen University, so we used our time from there to do it. Do you know Loes, the exact budget?
Well, we should be able to find it. No, so it's our salaries, our university salaries are there, and
I think the budget for the expenses and the subtitling and everything, that was around 5,000-6,000 euros. This is what I remember. But so this is yeah,
something like that. We overspent on subtitling, but we spent less on our stay in Texel.
Yeah.
But now I start to tell you that because we were wondering if you would have time for cooking. So the weekend before we traveled to Texel, we had prepared all dinners. So we brought all the food already to Texel and went for eating fried fish for lunch. But that's out of the budget. I think, I don't know. It could be 5,000 to 6,000 for what has been paid for. Yeah, this is not a good answer. I don't have.
Yeah, we don't know. There's one more question, but I would suggest we continue with the presentation, and there's another moment of questions after the next part, and then we will come to this question as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then we go to scene 4, the screening, because somewhere in May it was all finished, and then we had to show it. And we like to share with you how we showed it and what reactions. So first, can you please answer in the chat box? Can you indicate shortly what have you seen, or what came to your mind? What associations did you have while watching the documentary? So you saw us, it was at the beginning of March that Corona times came, and then we had to find a way how to deal with the premiere of the film. So all ideas about events on Texel as we had prepared went down. We couldn't organize the premiere, and no, that wasn't an easy moment, yeah, because on Texel, especially as we told you, Ineke, who's totally immersed in the fisheries sector on Texel, it was a hard time. Yeah, Corona times isn't easy in the fishery sector. By all means, the fishery sector isn't an easy sector to become rich and wealthy and without any concern. So they had to deal with that situation, and thereby said we don't like to have any festive activity. And so that even in the online events, they didn't want to have a very specific festive premiere. By then, of course, you know, the question rises, who owns the film? I mean, if you are doing research and you publish an article, you publish the article, you know, and nobody lays out the red tapestry for you the day the article is published. You can celebrate it in your group, in the museum where you work, or at home with your family, but it's not very special. But if you talk about a film premiere, which for us by all means was a little bit funny that we talked about premiere being an ethnographic documentary, but we had a plan with the Maritime Museum in Texel, etc. And it turned out not to be possible, also because Annetje and Ineke were so happy to somehow be part of the filmmaking team, which was a position we gave them as well. You know, it was as if throughout the year they became part of the team, which is of course also makes sense because they are the main characters. Ineke is a historian. Both of them answered many of our questions, etc., etc. So what happened? We searched for another opportunity to say, well, let's give it something special. And we found out there is an International Museum Day, and the International Museum Day of 2020 had a theme, Museums for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. And well, as we had focused a lot about this portrayal of women, about focusing on unheard stories, about bringing on stage in this case, the story of the Walvisvaders Huisje, which had been hidden for so long. We thought that was a very good moment. So that's where we organized it. And it was organized by putting the films on YouTube in premiere mode. And actually it turned out YouTube has a very nice way of dealing with a premiere. So they show already the icon of the film announcing so many days to the premiere, so many days. So there's a countdown in days, and very prior to the moment of releasing the film, there is a countdown in seconds. So somehow it gave that feeling of anticipation that something is going to happen. It was then also embedded on the website of the Whalers House. So that is the Whalers House, the museum part. It's not really a museum, partly a museum, the Whalers House. And we had press release and social media, sharing also first stories, let's say the background to the film. Then you get reviews. So there were some in local and regional newspapers. There were some publications on the film in the university magazine. And to the right here you see how it looks like on YouTube. So you can see there it was premiered on May 18, and you see the counting of the number of views. And then you see the highest count is actually for the Dutch version, with runner-up the English version, then the German version, and only few French viewers. Then we have some comments that people could write, but I think we later closed it. The same as you see, there is 2 likes, is 100% like, 6 likes, the 85.7%. I have no clue what it means, but there are more features, and actually we didn't use it. Also because we are still in between, is the film becoming a success when with a lot of likes, with a lot of views? We don't know, because we also make it available for downloads. So this is only the people who view it on the EMP channel, but eventually in French we have only few views because Some musea in France may have downloaded it and then shared it in other platforms. So in the end, we don't know really the number of views. But of course, we have to think, are the people watching we envisioned to be our audiences? And there we looked in different groups that we looked at stakeholders in governance and policy formation in relation to coastal resource managers, everybody who's interested in this, but not so much from a perspective of a tourist film, because it's not really a tourist film, it goes deeper. We also envisioned the audience as visitors of the whale house, students, stakeholders, and general audience. This is how we documented it initially. And then we tried to be a little bit more active. I think also, Pauline, do you agree that came with the webinar that we saw, are we active enough? We were thinking, how can we share it? And then okay. So you see there is an online sharing on different platforms. Then we looked at festivals. So the Pêcheurs du Monde, there we are still waiting. We are in touch with them. We are in touch with the International Heritage Film Festival in Portugal. And there are many film festivals directly related to Dutch fishery sectors, which have all been cancelled. So that would go to a next round. And we are in touch with the Museum Kaapskil on Texel Island itself, where they would, we are in touch to find a way to use it on secondary scoops, basically. Back to Pauline.
So we've got some very nice answers to our last question of share some terms or describe what came to your mind when you saw the documentary. And it's about the women, how natural they are in the film, or somebody else says viewing real-time interactions. So it's about people like the way we showed these women, and at the same time also the natural environment is mentioned, the weather and the conditions. That the natural setting made it very atmospheric. It was striking. Let me see. And it's actually, people want to visit Texel.
Hey.
I'm going to Texel now to see more. Yeah. So these were the main, and we also have another question. Shall I ask them now?
Yeah.
It is from someone. He's saying, currently I am working on a project called Arquivo de Memorias da Pesca do Bacalhau, Archive of Memories of Cod Fishing. Yeah. The project is not directly to produce a documentary, but to have a pool of footage to use on future productions of the museum. Do you have any suggestions on methods for the best way to capture images with great quality for future users? So, say is not wanting to make a complete documentary, but it's a collection of footage. Do we have advice on?
Yeah, but no, nice question. And I think this is something in Pericles we could give a follow-up. This is a question because eventually you are in deep trouble with a repository of footage. If I hear Arquivo de Memorias, the problem is, once you have this repository of footage, how to regain access. If you have and we are celebrating this week in the Netherlands the Biodiversity Museum Naturalis. They have millions of tiny insects and birds and whatsoever, and finding your way back is quite complicated, and finding your way through hours and hours of footage it's not easy, because how are you going to what software, etc. How are you going to name it? But also to find something, you often have to go through real-time viewing. And that's why a visual repository could become quite complicated. So my first answer is allow yourself to realize that you need somehow an active approach to obtaining this type of repository. Yeah, so it reflects our discussion of how to have a non-scripted script for an ethnographic documentary. So then I would say make a plan and try to elaborate, to develop an idea. Who would you like to ask for footage, and what type of footage would you like to obtain? And do you invent a modality to give some initial instructions? And these initial instructions could be technological instructions. Lesson number 1, please use panorama view. Yeah. But also I would say, if I were in the museum working with you, explain why you want them to think before they produce footage or do photography or make a short film, and that they think about how to send it to you. Another example is if people send you footage, and if you ever want to use it in a film, make sure you know still who did send you the footage. So everything should be labeled, or that people, if people, look, I'm making some notes now, isn't it? That people write on a piece of paper where the filming took place, on what date, who is the filmer, etc., etc. So if you have it in the footage, that you can also always go back to something. But in general, my advice is make a plan. It's not so easy just asking for it. Try to develop an elaborate plan, and ask people to help you if the plan is clear enough, and only then start finding this footage. Is this of help, this answer to the colleague who raised the question?
Yes, there is a yes.
And maybe I go, we will share our email addresses as well. Huh? Any other questions for now, Pauline?
There's a question, one last question. Why document for a bright future? I don't know if I understand it. Why document for a bright? I'm not quite sure what this question means. Why document for a bright future? Maybe.
Yeah, we talked about sustainable futures. Huh? I think it could refer that we say, well, we want to have a kind of active engagement with the past, because there's a kind of premise in the Pericles project that if we want to build a strong future in which we recognize who we are, what we have to recognize our past, to know our past, and to build on it. So to realize that we are just moments in time. So then in that sense, we talked about connecting the past with the future. Of course, it's not about a science fiction film. Yeah. So what we do in contemporary times, we try to engage with the past and figure out what it means nowadays to anticipate, thinking, or as we say, participatory or deliberative government for the future, where you need policies, decision plans, etc.
That was the last question. So, and it's also 2:05. So
no, we will wrap up then. The last thing, we called it backstage. There we have some loose ends. As academicians, we feel the research cycle is yet to be completed. We want to document somewhere, either write and publish an article, either make a making of something like this webinar and publish it in a video journal, or make a popular version of the making of. So this is all we feel yet we can talk more and share more about the experiences obtained. we are still struggling with the term ethnographic documentary, because ethnographic, I still feel it somehow contradicts documentary. So ethnographic is a little bit the outsider, just documenting what's going on in reality, whereas in a documentary you also want to clarify what is the point of view, literally, but also conceptually. And we feel it's not good enough just to say, well, we published the film online, because the whole world is publishing things online. So who is our audience, which is also a critical question to ourselves. Have we managed good enough, for example, the colleagues in Maritime Museum, have we managed to make it known to the public relations, to the science communication departments in Maritime or Coastal Musea, that the film is available and that we could give additional information and so on and so forth. And then last but not least, we like to hear from you any suggestions now, well, as far as we managed to share with you what we have been doing in this webinar. And thanks, Lisa, thanks, Matthew. Thank you, Elaine, for organizing the webinar, of course. We would like to ask you in general, do you have any suggestions to bring the ideas we are developing in the Pericles project? How could we all of this bring any further?